everyone, and welcome to today's episode. We're going to be talking about The Second Story Bookshop by Denise Hunter. So, this one is a contemporary romance and it fits within the Christian fiction category, and it's a standalone story. So, why did I want to read this one? Well, I've enjoyed reading books in the past by Denise Hunter. I've read quite a few, including Before We Were Us and Love Unscripted. And back in early 2025, when I first started my show, I recorded episode 14 on Denise Hunter's book, The Summer of You and Me. So you can go and check that one out as well. And I've got book recommendations for the books I've mentioned at my blog, and that's at narelleatkins.com, and there'll be a link in the show notes. So I'm going to add my usual disclaimer and say many thanks to the publisher who provided me with an advance reader copy, and all the opinions that I express in this episode are completely my own. So let's talk about the book. The Second Story Bookshop by Denise Hunter is set in a small town in North Carolina on a lake. And this one has quite a few romance tropes. So it's a second chances romance with high school sweethearts who reunite, which is always fun. It's also an enemies to love story, and you'll find out why they're enemies at the beginning very soon. We have a hero who was born on the wrong side of the tracks, and his father has left quite a bad reputation in town. So he has been tarred by his father's actions, and that has been an issue in this town for his entire life. We also have a matchmaking grandma via her will. We have forced proximity. We've got family drama, lots and lots of family drama. We have bookish characters with the bookshop setting. And we also have a love triangle that's not really a love triangle. So it is a love triangle, but it doesn't have the angst that often goes with a love triangle. And I'll explain why in a minute as I keep going. And we also have a dual timeline story. So we have our main characters in the present day, and we also have our main characters and what was going on when they're in high school as well. So that going back in time by 11 years in the story is kind of like a subplot. So let's talk about the first line, which is in the present day, which is this one. Nobody thought Viola Thatcher would ever expire, if for no other reason than sheer stubbornness. So Viola is our main character, Shelby's grandma, and she was well in her 80s when she passed away and was still working in her bookshop up until the very end. So Shelby's in her late 20s, and she's been working with her grandma pretty much for as long as she can remember in the bookstore. And she takes care of the customer service and looks after the staff, and her grandmother has done all the financials and the accounting side of the bookstore, and they pretty much work together as a team. So at the start of the story, her beloved grandmother has passed away, and we're at the funeral home, and Shelby's really wondering how she's going to manage without her grandmother, because as I said, her grandmother has looked after the financial side of the store, and Shelby had been reluctant to learn that and is now thinking that was a really dumb idea. I really should have paid attention to what was going on. And so she sees a big challenge ahead because she's expecting to inherit the bookshop from her grandmother in the will. So let's introduce Gray. So he's our hero. He's also in his late 20s, like Shelby, and he's an accountant and project manager for a construction company. And he actually lives and works in Riverbend Gap. So if you're a fan of Denise Hunter's books, you'll know that she had some books set in Riverbend Gap, and you'll see some mentions of some familiar characters in this story as well, even though it is definitely a standalone story. Now, what's happening at the beginning of the story is that Gray is visiting his hometown for Shelby's grandmother's funeral. And he left 11 years after high school, and that was a really messy and complicated situation for the reasons for why he left. And he was raised by his grandmother after his father was sent to jail for murder. So there's been a lot going on in his family. And so his grandma and Shelby's grandma were great friends, but sadly, when the story opens, they've both passed away. And so Gray inherited his grandma's lakefront home in the town, and of course, he doesn't live there, so he rents it out as an Airbnb rental. So that's where we are at the start of the story. So the meet cute is quite a dynamite situation. So we have take one of the meet cute, which is at the funeral home in chapter one, and Shelby very successfully manages to avoid seeing Gray at the funeral home. And she thinks that that's all well and good. He's come to pay his respects to her grandma, who, for whatever reason, always had a soft spot for Gray. And she thinks this is fine. I can just get on with my life. Except we have take two of the meet cute, which is at the reading of the will. So Gray has been invited by the executor, who's a lawyer, who's doing a family reading of the will, which was requested by her grandmother. And the shock in that little conversation is that Shelby only inherits 51% of the bookshop, and her grandmother has left 49% of the bookshop to Gray. So all the problems and reasons she didn't want to see him in the past are still there. And then we magnify it by 1,000 because suddenly he's inherited almost half of the bookstore. So, as you can imagine, there are so many problems in this story because they start off as enemies from the get go in the present day. And there's problems that have happened in the past. And as I said, the past is kind of like a subplot. So you move from present day and you go back 11 years and it's seamlessly woven through the story. So you don't feel like you're going into random flashbacks. It actually feels like you're reading a subplot as you go through the story, which I really liked. So back in high school, both of them had an enormous amount of emotional baggage from their childhoods, and they both had some really hard things happen and a lot of unresolved issues relating to that. And there was a lot of family dysfunction and family issues that were happening simultaneously with all that as well. And we have characters with abandonment issues as well, which complicates a whole lot of stuff. And so 11 years ago, when Gray left town and effectively he and Shelby broke up and their relationship was beyond repair, there's a whole lot of stuff from that messy and complicated relationship 11 years ago that has come into the present day story. So that's one of the reasons we're going back and forth between the past and the present. And all that baggage from 11 years ago gets unpacked effectively in the subplot in the story, which was really cool. So in the present day, the big issue is obviously the bookshop and what is going on with that and the ownership arrangement. There's also a whole lot of family drama in Shelby's family, and the townsfolk all the way through have really not given Gray a good chance. They've had issues with him because of his father. Even though his grandmother had a really good reputation in town, that wasn't enough to counter the actions of his father. So he's really had a rough time all his life and hasn't really been treated fairly when he's been back in his hometown. And there were so many things I really liked about this story. I loved a lot of things in this story. One of them was the way the dual timeline worked. And I have read books. I'm not a massive fan of flashbacks, to be honest, in stories. So I did start this thinking, oh no, please tell me we don't have a whole lot of flashbacks that are going to drive me nuts. But that's not the case. The flashbacks were really well done and beautifully woven into the story. And I really loved that. The romance was just lovely. The emotional depth in the characters, because we were able to go back to the past and we could feel what they were feeling in the past, that really added a lot more to what was going on in the present because we understood the context of all the unresolved stuff that was happening. And I can't say any more because I'm not going to give away spoilers. And I really empathized with Gray and Shelby and just with how difficult certain aspects of their lives were, and certain situations and relationships were very difficult. And a lot of that was not their fault. And so I really did empathize with their situation in the past and the present. And the family drama and how that played out, I just really loved that with Shelby's family. It was the side characters were great, and I really appreciated the role that they played in the story. And I love the bookshop setting. And there is an adorable dog that makes an appearance in this story who you'll fall in love with as well if you're a dog person. And the way the love triangle plays out, so there is technically a love triangle in the book, and technically at 66%, Shelby has a boyfriend in the present day at the start of the book who she breaks up with at 66%. So that really does sound like it is a love triangle. And yes, it is, but it's not a love triangle in terms of angst because of the way the enemies to love trope plays out in the story. So at the very beginning, she has a boyfriend, and Gray is completely not on her radar as any kind of relationship material. And it's not until later in the story when that happens that the situation with the boyfriend in the current day is dealt with. So I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to give away the story. But if you don't like love triangles because you don't like the angst that goes along with the love triangles, I really didn't feel that angst in the story. I knew that it was inevitable that Gray was the hero. He was always going to be the one that won her heart. The romance was going to deliver on its promise from the beginning. And so the love triangle wasn't something that really bothered me in any way, shape, or form. And to be honest, I think it would have been almost unrealistic if Shelby had have broken up with her boyfriend earlier. And that's all I'm going to say on it because I really don't want to give away any spoilers in the story. So, anyway, my favorite book quote in the story is this one. The forgiveness she granted him had been such a lavish gift. Now, I would describe this story as having relevant faith elements that are a very light touch on the page, but are very deeply ingrained in the story. So, if you're looking for a book that if you did a quick read and if you search for keywords, you're not going to find much Christian content in it, then this is a great book to read. But if you're looking for a book that has a lot of deep biblical themes in the story that underpin everything, if you look for those themes, you'll find them. And I really love the way that the redemption and forgiveness themes were woven into the story in a whole lot of different ways. And there were some really cool metaphors that I appreciated in the way that the story was structured as well. And the consequences of unforgiveness and holding grudges was really explored in the story. And I appreciated the way that all played out as well. So, in terms of the impact on me, there were lots of smiles because it was a really fun story. And it was really fun to go back to high school and then move back to the present and to see the journey that these two characters had gone on in terms of their relationship. I was also worried about the characters at different times for a whole bunch of reasons. There was a little bit of danger in the story at a certain point. So I was like, oh my goodness, I hope everything will be okay. So I did have those moments. And the story had really complicated small town dynamics. And the way all that played out really did make me think. And it really did challenge me to think about what was actually going on and what was happening with some of the side characters and all that kind of stuff. So it did make me think. And I do like reading books that make me think as well. So I like that. So, in summary, I would recommend the Second Story Bookshop to readers who like small town romance, to readers who like high school sweethearts who reunite, and obviously second chance romances, to readers who like characters who are from different worlds in terms of social class. And if you like matchmaking from the grave via a will that creates enemies to love dynamics on steroids, and you'll like this one. If you like family drama and bookish characters and forced proximity, then you'll like this one. And if you like your contemporary romances that are set in the present day but have a dual storyline where you've got your characters and their relationship in the past that is woven together as a subplot, then you'll like this one. And if you like reading small town romances where the town really is a character and plays a significant role in the story, then you'll like this one. And if you like stories with relevant faith elements that are a very light touch on the page, but have very deep roots in the story in terms of the faith content that you can find if you go digging and look for it, then you'll really enjoy this story as well. Thanks for joining me today. Does the Second Story Bookshop sound like a book that you'd like to read? Have you read it? What did you think? You can let me know. Now, if you're listening on the podcast, you can send me a text via a link in the show notes. If you're watching at YouTube, you can like the episode at YouTube and also leave a comment there. You can also email me at my website where I have a contact form, and that's at narelleatkins.com. And please subscribe if you've enjoyed listening to this episode. And you can subscribe at your favorite podcasting app or subscribe at YouTube, and then you'll receive a notification of when the next episode drops. And also, if you have enjoyed this episode, please share the link with a friend, especially a friend who likes reading contemporary romance and who you think would enjoy reading Denise Hunter's books. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.